Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind howled hard across the plains as the sun sank low behind the Tetons, casting long shadows over the Jackson homestead. Inside the clapboard house, heated voices cut through the quiet dusk. "You'll do it, Odessa," her father barked, slamming his hand against the kitchen table. "You'll marry Nathaniel Crowder, and that's final." Odessa Jackson stood stiff by the hearth, fists clenched at her sides. She was 21, tall and strong from years working stock, with dark hair braided down her back and eyes full of fire. "He is twice my age, and I do not love him." "Love?" her father scoffed. "This ain't a storybook. Nathaniel's got land, cattle, and no wife. He'll take care of you." "That's more than any cowboy can offer." Her stomach turned. Nathaniel Crowder had been her father's drinking companion for years, mean-spirited, heavy-handed, and always watching her with a hunger that made her skin crawl. "I'd rather die alone than be under his roof," she said quietly. He stepped toward her, towering over her with the same fury he'd used to break wild mustangs. "You'll marry him at the end of the week. I gave him my word." Odessa pushed past him and stormed out into the cold. The wind bit through her shawl, but she barely felt it. She walked fast toward the barn, where the only one who might understand was saddling a bay gelding under lantern light. Kenton McCrae turned at the sound of her boots. He was 26, lean and steady, with sunburned skin and eyes the color of the river in spring. A cowboy through and through, quiet hands, callous palms, and a heart he rarely showed. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low and steady. She walked up to him, eyes wild. "My father's marrying me off to Nathaniel Crowder." Kenton froze, then straightened. "When?" "Saturday." He looked at her a long time. "You do not want that." "No." Her voice cracked. "I need out, Kenton. I need someone to—" Before she could finish, he stepped forward, took her hand, and held it tight. "Then come with me." She looked up at him, heart pounding so loud she thought he might hear it. "You would do that?" "I cannot let a man like Crowder touch you," he said. "I won't." They did not wait. Kenton led her to his horse and helped her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. He wrapped one arm firm around her waist, the other guiding the reins, and turned the gelding toward the open night. They rode hard under the moon, the wind tugging at her hair, the land stretching wide and empty before them. She leaned into him, feeling his heartbeat against her back. He said nothing, but the way he held her careful, protective, meant more than any words. By dawn, they reached a small cabin tucked into the pines near the Snake River. It belonged to Kenton's uncle, long since passed, and had not seen life in years, but it stood, solid and dry. Kenton swung down, then lifted her gently from the saddle. Their eyes met, breath clouding in the cold. "This place is safe," he said. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He opened the door and they stepped inside. That day passed quiet. Kenton chopped wood, drew water from the creek, and kept the fire burning. Odessa swept the dust from the floors, washed her face, and watched him move. He worked like he rode, thoughtful, steady, and sure. That evening they sat by the fire, a thin stew bubbling in the pot. She pulled her knees up, wrapped in a quilt. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. He looked at her through the flicker of flame. "Because I have loved you since the first day I saw you riding that buckskin mare, hair in your face, cussing at a broken saddle strap." Her breath caught, tears rising before she could stop them. He reached over, brushed a thumb across her cheek. "You do not have to love me back. I just needed you safe." Odessa stared at him, her heart aching in a way it never had before. She reached out, took his hand, and held it tight. "I think I always have," she whispered. "I just did not know it until now." Kenton's throat moved as he swallowed. Slowly, carefully, he leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. Outside, snow began to fall. Inside, the fire crackled low, and for the first time in her life, Odessa Jackson felt like she belonged to something good. By the second morning, the storm had settled into a soft hush, laying a pale coat across the pine boughs. Kenton stood at the edge of the porch, steam rising from the tin cup in his hands. He didn't look back when Odessa stepped out beside him, wrapped in a wool coat too broad for her shoulders. "You warm enough?" he asked, eyes on the faint trail of smoke curling from the chimney across the ridge 3 miles off, maybe more. "I am," she said. "You think they're looking already? They'd be fools not to." She watched his jaw shift. His face, always calm, carried a new tension now. Not fear, he didn't rattle easy, but something closer to watchfulness. He was thinking ahead, always working the angles. Odessa followed his gaze to the distance. "You know that smoke?" he nodded. "Used to be a French trapper out that way, dead 10 years now. Could be anyone." She sipped from the cup he handed her. The taste was bitter, bark steeped in boiled water, but it warmed her throat. "I don't regret it," she said after a moment. He didn't answer right away. Then, low, "I know." She wanted to ask what came next, but something in his silence told her he hadn't figured that part yet. So she turned and stepped back inside, letting the door fall shut behind her. Later that afternoon, they sat at the table going over what they had: salt pork, cornmeal, half a sack of oats, and a jar of honey so old the surface had crusted. Kenton ran a hand through his hair, calculating how long they could stretch it. "I'll ride out tomorrow," he said. "Leave early. There's a general store west near the river fork. Might take a day and a half there and back." She tensed. "You'd go alone, safer that way," he said. "Folks see us together, they'll talk, might ride straight back to your father." She folded her hands. "I can pull water, cut wood. I won't sit here useless." He looked up, and something eased in his eyes. "I know you won't." That evening they sat close near the hearth, the light playing across the cabin walls. Odessa stitched a tear in her skirt, the thread catching in her cold fingers. Kenton leaned back against the wall, oil lamp flickering above his head. "You ever think of leaving Wyoming?" she asked. He took a while to answer. "Sometimes, but I always come back." "Why?" "My mother's buried here, south of Dubois. I used to ride out there every spring, clear the brush from her grave. She always said land remembers the people who love it." Odessa ran her fingers along the hem of her skirt. "I never knew my mother," she said. "She died the winter I turned 5. All I remember is her voice, soft, like the wind through grass." They sat quiet for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Kenton shifted, pulling a folded sheet from under his saddlebag. He passed it to her. "What's this?" "Deed papers. For 40 acres just north of here. I put money down last year. Was saving to build something." She stared at the brittle page. "You never said." "Didn't have a reason to." He looked away. "Until now." She folded the paper carefully and set it on the table. Her voice came soft. "If you build it, I want to help." He didn't reach for her, didn't speak. Just nodded once, slow and sure. That night, after the fire had burned low and the wind rose again beyond the walls, Odessa lay under the quilt, staring at the rafters. She heard the steady rhythm of Kenton's breathing from the floor near the hearth. The cabin was old. Its corners creaked in the wind and the shutters rattled. But inside, there was warmth. Not just from the fire, but from the quiet certainty of the man who had taken her hand and never let go. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow he would ride out. Tomorrow they would begin what came next. But tonight she was safe. And for the first time in her life, she was not alone. Kenton rode out before sunrise, his saddle creaking in the cold hush of morning. Odessa watched from the cabin doorway, arms crossed tight against the chill. He didn't glance back, but she saw the set of his shoulders, deliberate, sure, and carrying more than the weight of supplies. She spent that day moving through the cabin like she belonged to it. She split kindling until her palms stung and set a heavy pot to soak. By noon, snow softened into drizzle and she stepped out behind the cabin, dragging a cracked washtub to the creek. The water bit at her wrists, but she didn't stop scrubbing until the linens ran clean. Near dusk, she found the trapdoor in the corner, half hidden beneath a loose board. The root cellar held more than she expected: jars of lard, smoked salt, a bundle of dried lavender wrapped in yellowed muslin. She knelt there a long while, breathing in the faint scent of earth and thyme. That night she ate alone, cornmeal mush and a sliver of pork. She kept the fire high and the rifle by the windowsill, though no one came. By the second day, the wind had shifted. She woke to a patch of blue sky, the first she'd seen since they'd arrived. She carried the quilt outside and shook it clean, then hung it on the line strung between two pines. As it fluttered, she studied the tree line beyond the ridge. No movement. No rider. When the sun dropped low again and he still hadn't returned, she paced the cabin, the floorboards worn smoother where he'd walked. She lit the lamp early and sat with her back against the wall, boots unlaced, the rifle across her lap. It wasn't until near midnight that she heard hooves. She stepped out barefoot, rifle lowered but ready. Kenton came out of the dark slow and steady, leading the gelding on foot. His coat was soaked through and the left side of his jaw was bruised dark. "God, Kenton," she said, reaching for him. "What happened?" He handed her the reins and staggered once, catching himself on the rail. Ran into Wallace Dunn and two of his boys near the fork. "Recognized me." Her hands flew to his arm. "They follow you." "No, I led him east a ways, then doubled back through the rocks. Took longer than I meant." He nodded at the saddlebag. "Got what I could. Flour, beans, coffee. Not much meat." She pulled him inside, peeled his coat off, and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. He sat by the hearth as she took a wet cloth to his face, careful with the split lip and the scrape above his brow. "Did they say anything?" she asked. "Just called me Jackson's stray." Asked where I'd stashed his daughter. Her jaw tightened. "He's really sent men after me," he nodded. "They're not bounty, Odessa, just local boys with long memories and short tempers, but they'll keep looking." She sat back on her heels. "Then we can't stay here." "No," he said. "But we've got time. The trail I took'll keep him guessing." He reached for her hand then, fingers warm despite the cold. She let him hold it. His thumb moved across her knuckles, slow and steady. "I saw Reverend Collier," he said after a pause. "He's out near the edge of the basin, tending that one-room chapel. I asked if he still had that license he used when he married the old miners." She stared at him, heart suddenly still. He looked at her, eyes steady. "He said he'd do it come Sunday. If you want it." She didn't speak for a long breath. Then she nodded once. "I want it." Kenton's shoulders dropped, not in relief but in something gentler. He didn't lean closer or press her for more. He just sat with her in the hush, his hand around hers, the fire low but lasting. Outside, the wind moved through the trees without urgency. They would leave soon. Find new land. Build a home from what they carried and what they'd yet to find. But tonight, in a cabin that had once belonged to no one, Odessa Jackson made the quiet choice that would shape the rest of her days. And Kenton McCrae, bruised and bone-tired, held her hand like he never meant to let it go. The chapel stood at the edge of the basin, its weather-worn boards silvered by years of sun and wind. Odessa stepped down from Kenton's gelding, her boots sinking into the thaw-softened dirt. Her coat was patched and plain, and her hair was pinned back without ornament. She had nothing borrowed, nothing blue, and no one to walk her toward the door but Kenton himself. He didn't offer his arm. He didn't have to. She walked beside him, her hand brushing his, and when their fingers found each other, they didn't let go. The chapel door creaked open under Kenton's hand. Inside, Reverend Collier stood by the window, his collar loose and a Bible worn soft in his grip. He nodded once, not asking questions, not offering blessings they hadn't asked for. Behind him, the wooden pews sat empty and the dust in the air caught the light like smoke. Odessa took her place beside Kenton before the rough-hewn altar. Her heartbeat was steady now. She didn't glance at the door. She didn't wonder if someone would come to stop them. Her father's reach didn't matter here. "You come of your own will?" the Reverend asked. "Yes," Odessa said. Kenton's voice followed hers. "I do." The ceremony was short. No rings passed between them. Just a vow, spoken clear and without tremble, and a joining of hands that felt like a promise they'd already made. Afterwards, as the door swung shut behind them, a gust of wind stirred the prairie grasses, bending them in a long breath toward the north. Kenton reached for the reins, but Odessa placed a hand on his chest. "I want to walk," she said. They led the horse behind them, boots brushing through winter dead stalks. The sky above was wide and pale, the clouds thin enough for light to pass through. She could feel the shape of the land beneath her, the slow rise and fall of hills that hadn't yet seen plow or fence. "Did you ever think you'd marry?" she asked. "No," Kenton said. "Not until you." She looked over at him. "Why not before?" He ran his thumb along the leather reins. "Didn't think I had anything to offer. A man needs more than a good seat in the saddle, needs patience, quiet, a way of staying when things get hard." "You've always had those," she said. He didn't answer, but his hand found hers again, their fingers lacing without thought. They reached the edge of a wide slope where the basin fell away into low pasture. A few cottonwoods stood in the near distance, their branches bare. Below, a creek wound through the grass like a thread of silver. Kenton pointed toward the rise near the trees. "I was thinking the house might sit there, close enough to the water, far enough the floods won't reach us." She stepped forward, imagining the shape of it in her mind. "One room to start. We'll add on when we can." "I want a window that faces east," she said. "So I can see morning come." He nodded. "And a porch, with space for 2 chairs." They stood there a while longer, the wind lifting the edge of Odessa's coat. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the sprig of lavender she'd found in the cellar. The petals were dry, the scent faint but sharp. She placed it in his hand. "For the first beam," she said. He folded it gently, tucked it into the inside of his coat. "We'll build it strong." They turned back as the sun lowered behind the horizon. The chapel was far behind them now, barely more than a shadow on the land. Kenton reached up, helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her just as he had that first night. But this time there was no urgency in the ride, no fear at their heels. Just the steady rhythm of hooves and the quiet weight of something beginning. As they moved down the trail toward the cabin, Odessa felt the land settle under them, their land now. Not gifted, not stolen, but chosen. And with every step forward, she pressed closer to the man beside her, the only one who had seen her clearly and chosen to stay. They did not look back. There was nothing behind them worth mourning. Ahead, the wind carried the scent of pine and thawing earth. And beside her, Kenton's hand rested over hers, firm and sure, the shape of forever in its grip. The first days in their new land passed with the slow rhythm of honest work. Kenton felled pines with measured strikes, each swing of the axe carving their future into the hillside. Odessa hauled the saplings he hewed, her hands blistered but steady, her eyes tracing the lines of the foundation they laid together. By midweek, the frame stood rough, strong, and tall enough to hold the sky. Odessa stretched canvas across the roof beams while Kenton notched the wall braces. They spoke little, but their silence held ease now. each glance and gesture built from trust that had grown quiet and deep as riverstone. Late one evening, as the last of the daylight bled across the peaks, Odessa sat on the half-finished porch with her legs stretched out, a tin cup warm between her palms. Kenton came beside her, wiping sawdust from his arms with a scrap of cloth. "You think this place'll hold through winter?" she said, nodding toward the frame. He looked it over, then sat beside her. "If it don't, we'll fix it until it does." She leaned her shoulder lightly against his. "You always talk like nothing can break you." "I've never believed in that," he said. "But I do believe in mending." She turned her face toward him, her hair brushing the collar of his shirt. "I want to raise things here, not just walls, chickens, maybe a milk cow, tomatoes if the soil's good." "You'll have it," he said. "Whatever you grow, I'll build around it." They stayed like that until the light faded altogether and the chill crept in. Kenton stood and reached down for her hand, not out of habit, but because he wanted to feel her fingers in his. She took it without hesitation, letting him guide her inside the frame where canvas flapped gently in the breeze. That night they laid their bedrolls side by side beneath the stars. No roof yet, just open sky and the scent of fresh pine. Odessa curled close, her head on his shoulder, the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "You miss anything from before?" she asked into the dark. He didn't answer right away. Then, only the sound of you laughing. "I used to hear it from the barn when your father wasn't around." She traced the edge of his shirt collar with one finger. "I don't laugh much anymore." "You will," he said. "Not because you forget what came before, but because you'll remember what came after." Summer came slow and green. They built the walls higher, filled the gaps with clay and straw, and set a stone hearth at the cabin's north end. Odessa planted beans and squash near the creek bank. Her knees sunk into the soil while Kenton fashioned a fence to keep the elk out. One morning she found Kenton staring down at his hands, his brow drawn tight. "What is it?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He opened a small pouch and tipped its contents into his palm. A silver coin and a ring, plain brass, worn smooth on one edge. "My mother's," he said. "She wore it until the day she died." Odessa's breath caught, but she didn't speak. "I've carried it 13 years," he said. "Couldn't give it to anyone until now." He didn't ask. He just held it out, his hand steady. She slid it onto her finger where it rested, light and certain. They didn't celebrate with words or ceremony. Just a lean-in, a kiss that lingered longer than any before, and the shared quiet of two people who had chosen each other without question. By autumn, the cabin stood complete. The porch held 2 chairs. The east window caught the first light of morning. Odessa's squash ripened fat and golden in the earth. The milk cow bartered from a passing family for Kenton's old saddle, and a sack of flour stood calm in the lean-to, her breath clouding in the early chill. One evening, Odessa stood at the threshold, watching the wind stir the grass. Kenton came up behind her, wrapping a shawl over her shoulders. "You ever think on what we left behind?" she asked. "I remember it," he said, "but I don't miss it." She turned to him. "I don't either." He kissed her, then not with haste, not with hunger, but with the long, patient kind of love that came from choosing the same person each day, no matter the weather or the work. That winter the roof held. So did they. Years passed. The land changed slowly, as land tends to do. Trees grew taller. The squash patch spread. A cradle sat in the corner of the cabin's single room, carved by Kenton's hands and lined with Odessa's old shawl. Their daughter, born one spring morning as the creek thawed, slept with her tiny fist curled beneath her chin. Odessa sang sometimes now, soft and low, while she stirred the pot or hung laundry to dry. Kenton would pause in his work to listen, his eyes warm with the quiet joy of it. They never spoke of the past, not out of fear, but because it had no hold on them now. What they had built was rooted in the soil beneath their feet, in the walls they'd raised together, in the life they lived shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand. And in every morning light that spilled through the east window, they found proof of the promise they had once made without ceremony or witness, to choose each other, again and again, for all the days to come.